Zayden Thompson was 10 years old when a white math lecturer laughed in his face and called his mind a fantasy. In a room full of Ivy League legacies, he dared to raise his hand, not for attention, but because he saw the answer. What followed wasn't applause, it was humiliation, suspension, and a nation's attempt to erase him. But that equation, it wasn't just unsolved, it was stolen. And when Zayden stepped back onto that stage, America would never forget what he wrote next. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the silence inside the ivory-walled halls of Atoria Prep already spoke volumes. The marble floors, glistening with fresh polish, reflected the prestige of a school that had, for generations, catered to the elite. Tucked away in a suburb outside Atlanta, it was where the children of senators, tech billionaires, and Ivy League legacies sharpened their ambitions. It wasn't a place that made room for new stories, especially not ones like Zayden Thompson's. Zayden stood at the edge of the hallway, clutching his worn-out backpack like it held his entire identity. In a way, it did. A crumpled geometry book poked from the side zipper, and the strap had been stitched back together by his mother, with leftover thread from an old nursing uniform. He was too young to be carrying the kind of expectations that followed him, but too smart to be anywhere else. The transfer had happened fast. A scholarship had opened unexpectedly, and his test scores had outpaced every student in 3 districts. It was supposed to be a celebration, but as he stepped into his first advanced mathematics class, celebration was the last thing the air allowed. The classroom was silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock that seemed to mock each passing second. Students sat in orderly rows, blazers crisp, iPads ready, expressions glazed with quiet entitlement. The kind of quiet that grows not from discipline but from generations of knowing you belong. Dr. Kent Holbrook, tall, white, and sharply dressed in a 3-piece suit, with horn-rimmed glasses, barely looked up from his syllabus. His graying hair was neatly parted, and his voice, when he finally spoke, had the kind of slow, dismissive drawl that wrapped judgment in politeness. "You must be Thompson," he said without warmth, not even lifting his eyes. "Yes, sir," Zayden replied, his voice clear but soft. A few students smirked. One girl, Kennedy, leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Did he just say yes, sir? That's cute." They giggled, not bothering to lower their voices. Zayden heard it. He always heard it. The coded language, the laughter that wasn't loud but sharp enough to cut through bone. But he sat down anyway, taking the empty seat in the back row. That seat, always empty, wasn't empty by chance. Dr. Holbrook resumed his lecture without further acknowledgement. He moved through linear equations like he was reciting poetry, his chalk dancing across the board with arrogance. These fundamentals should be second nature by now. If they're not, he paused, shooting a glance toward the back without naming names, then perhaps this class isn't the right fit for everyone. It was subtle, but Zayden had learned how racism didn't always scream. Sometimes it sighed, rolled its eyes, or simply pretended not to see you at all. As the class went on, Zayden's fingers moved like clockwork across his notebook. Math wasn't just numbers to him. It was music. It was a code the world didn't expect someone like him to know, and certainly didn't want him to rewrite. Halfway through the session, Dr. Holbrook tapped his marker and turned to the room. "Let's try something different," he said, walking over to the chalkboard, his steps slow, deliberate. This problem was first introduced at an international symposium in 1984. It stumped doctoral candidates. Some say it's more philosophy than math. He wrote out a sprawling, complex equation, one that seemed to stretch across dimensions. Numbers danced with variables, and concepts beyond most undergraduate work. There were audible gasps from some students. One boy let out a low whistle. "Ain't no way." Dr. Holbrook stepped back, clearly savoring the moment. "No extra credit, no reward," he said. "I just want to see if anyone here even dares to try." But he turned, locking eyes briefly with Zayden. "Don't embarrass yourself." The message was delivered like a needle wrapped in velvet. Sharp, but masked as mentorship. The room went quiet. Zayden stared at the equation. The chalk lines seemed to glow. He blinked once, then twice. Something shifted inside him. Not arrogance, not even confidence. Just recognition. Patterns emerged. Structures nested inside structures. The kind of math that speaks its own language to those who can hear it. He looked around. Every other student had leaned back in their seats. Arms crossed. Minds checked out. The problem wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to be feared. Zayden's hand twitched. Then he did something no one expected. He raised it. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't loud. It was slow, hesitant, yet filled with quiet courage, like a boy not trying to prove anything, just trying to ask a question in a language he knew too well. The room froze. Even Dr. Halbrook took a second to respond. Caught off guard. Yes, Thompson. I think I can solve it, Zayden said, his voice steady but not arrogant. Whispers rippled across the room like a dropped glass in a cathedral. Kennedy scoffed. Yeah, okay. Dr. Halbrook's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite disbelief. More like disdain poorly disguised as amusement. You think you can solve a problem that's gone unanswered for 40 years? He asked, walking toward the board. Zayden nodded once. Do you even understand what this equation means? I do, Zayden said, more firmly this time. Dr. Halbrook placed the chalk down like it was a gavel. Then by all means, impress. Zayden stood slowly, his backpack still looped around one shoulder. He walked to the front with steps that felt heavier than they should. The board towered in front of him. Every eye in the room was on him. Not with hope, not with curiosity, but with expectation of failure. He picked up the chalk. It felt colder than he imagined. Behind him someone whispered, "This is gonna be good." Another added, "Place your bets." But Zayden wasn't listening. His mind was already somewhere else. Not here, not now, not in this room where privilege cloaked itself in preparation. He saw the problem differently, not just a sequence of numbers, but a story, and he knew how to finish it. He reached out to write the first line, then paused, because in the reflection of the chalkboard, he saw something he didn't expect. Dr. Halbrook, arms folded, smiling, not encouragingly, but like a man watching a train he believes will derail. And that's when Zayden realized something deeper than math was being tested here. Not his intellect, his place. He took a breath, pressed chalk to board, and a sharp voice interrupted from the hallway. Administration to room 24. Now, Dr. Halbrook flinched. Zayden froze. Something bigger had just been set in motion. The intercom buzz had barely faded when Dr. Halbrook raised a hand to silence the class. For a moment, Zayden stood frozen, chalk still in hand, staring at the sprawling equation before him. The message from the hallway had shifted the energy, but Dr. Halbrook made no move to leave. Instead, he smiled. "Sit down, Mr. Thompson," he said, the words sliding out like syrup laced with venom. "We wouldn't want to waste your first day with fantasy." Zayden turned slowly, the chalk trembling slightly between his fingers. His eyes scanned the room. Kennedy's smirk had returned. Her friend covered a laugh with her manicured hand. Other students looked away, some with pity, others with thinly veiled amusement. Halbrook walked to the front of the class and plucked the chalk from Zayden's hand like he was taking a toy from a toddler. "This equation," he said, tapping the board, "has gone unsolved for over 40 years. Do you understand what that means?" His voice was calm, but every syllable carried an undercurrent of performance. "It means entire academic think tanks have tried. Mathematicians with decades of training. And you think after one day at this school, you've figured it out." He turned to face the class, as if inviting their agreement. "It's not about race," he added, with the kind of fake neutrality that always signals it is. "It's about readiness, preparation, foundation." Zayden felt the heat behind his ears rise. Not from embarrassment, from something deeper, something ancestral. A feeling that had lived in his blood long before he walked into this room. "I wasn't trying to be disrespectful," he said quietly, but it carried in the room like thunder. "I just saw a pattern." Dr. Halbrook let out a short laugh, the kind meant to humiliate. "Well, some patterns," he said, stepping closer to Zayden, "aren't meant for everyone to follow, especially when they lead to disappointment." There it was. Not a direct insult, but a coded slap. The kind of statement you couldn't protest without being labeled sensitive or confrontational. The kind of microaggression that sounded like mentorship, but carried the full weight of erasure. "Let's continue," Dr. Halbrook said, turning back to the class. "We'll revisit real-world problems now, ones that can actually be solved." Zayden walked back to his seat, his spine straight, but his fingers clenched tight. As he passed Kennedy, she muttered, "Math Messiah over here." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut. He sat down slowly, the humiliation settling in like fog. Around him, the classroom moved on, but his mind did not. The chalkboard still burned in his vision. Not because he had failed, but because he hadn't been allowed to try. The rest of the lesson passed in a haze. Dr. Halbrook continued the lecture, occasionally pausing to cold call students from the front row. Students he praised for answers that barely scratched the surface. Zayden stayed silent, his notebook open but untouched. The final bell rang. Students gathered their tablets and notebooks with choreographed ease, their polished shoes tapping against the floor like a rhythm Zayden hadn't learned yet. As he gathered his own things, Dr. Halbrook approached. "You've got potential, Zayden," he said, voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. "But potential without discipline is dangerous. You don't want to be that kid who thinks he's the exception. This world has rules. Best to follow them." Zayden didn't respond. He simply nodded and walked out. The hallway was brighter than the classroom, but it didn't feel warmer. He passed bulletin boards plastered with photos, chess club champions, debate team winners, a mathlete's trophy case. Not a single black face among them. Not one. Outside, the sun had risen fully. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance. Zayden took a deep breath, then another. He tried to shake off the weight of what had happened, but he couldn't. That night, at home, he barely touched his dinner. His mother, Simone, watched him closely from across the kitchen table. "Tough first day?" she asked. He nodded. She set her fork down and reached for his hand. "You don't have to prove anything to them, baby." Zayden looked at her, eyes dark but burning. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I just know I'm right." She paused, searching his face. "Then let that be enough," she said gently. But for Zayden, it wasn't. Not this time. When she went to bed, he stayed up. The house was silent, lit only by the flickering hallway light and the soft hum of the fridge. He pulled out his notebook and rewrote the equation from memory. It was all still there. Every digit, every symbol, every twist and curve. He didn't have the prestige. He didn't have the right accent. He didn't have the benefit of the doubt. But he had this. Hours passed. Midnight turned to 2 a.m. His pencil scratched across the paper in long sweeping lines. Mistakes were made, erased, made again. Not once did he stop to question if he was capable, only how he could make it work. And somewhere between the mess of calculations and recalculations, something shifted. A door cracked open inside his mind. Connections formed, numbers danced, and the problem that had been mocked as too advanced, too complicated, too out of reach, began to speak back. Zayden paused, staring at the page. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply turned the page and kept going. As the clock hit 3:14 a.m., a sudden knock at the front door shattered the silence. The knock at the door had startled the quiet of the Thompson home. Simone, half asleep and still in her scrubs, blinked at the clock on her nightstand. 3:15 a.m. For a moment she thought she had imagined it. Then came another knock, harder, sharper this time. She slipped her feet into worn slippers and walked through the narrow hallway. Zayden was still at the kitchen table, hunched over his notebook, pencil racing across pages, filled with cryptic numbers. His eyes darted up as she passed. "Go to bed, sweetheart," she whispered, trying not to sound worried. He didn't look up again. "Just 5 more minutes, Mom." The knock came again. Simone's heartbeat quickened. She cracked open the door. No one was there. Only the empty porch bathed in a dull amber glow from the streetlight. But on the ground lay something unexpected. A folded flyer. She bent down to pick it up. It was from Atoria Prep. Parent-teacher. Welcome meeting. Postponed. Scribbled at the bottom in black marker were the words, "Watch your boy." Simone's chest tightened. She looked down the street. Nothing. Just silence. Just night. When she turned back inside, Zayden had fallen asleep over his notebook, pencil still in hand. She gently closed the book, meaning to place it on the counter. But curiosity tugged at her. The pages weren't filled with doodles or homework problems. They were covered in sprawling, layered calculations, not childish arithmetic, but dense, intricate math that looked like it belonged on a university blackboard. Her breath caught. "Zayden," she whispered to herself. There were arrows connecting terms, boxed equations, and even annotations in tiny handwriting. Pattern reappears when symmetry breaks. Try isolating the constant. Simone didn't understand the math, but she understood the look in his eyes when he worked. The same fire she'd seen when his father used to talk about the stars before life pulled them apart. She tucked the notebook back under his arm and turned off the light. But as she walked away, the words on that flyer burned in her mind. "Watch your boy." By morning, Zayden was already awake. He had barely slept, but his exhaustion was hidden under the quiet glow of discovery. His mind was buzzing, fueled by something greater than defiance. For the first time, the equation wasn't just numbers. It was truth, and he was beginning to understand it. At school, though, nothing felt different. The hallways still whispered when he passed. Teachers still paused a fraction too long when calling on him. He felt eyes on him not for who he was, but for who they thought he shouldn't be. During lunch, he sat alone. Across the cafeteria, Kennedy and her friends were laughing about something on a phone screen. He didn't have to guess what it was. He'd overheard enough to know it was about him. He pushed away his tray and slipped quietly out of the cafeteria, heading toward the empty math wing. The corridor smelled faintly of cleaning solution and chalk dust. From down the hall came the rhythmic squeak of a mop.
"Mr. Thompson," a deep voice called softly.
Zayden turned to see Mr. Elijah, the janitor, an older black man with kind, weathered eyes and a slow, deliberate way of speaking. He'd seen Zayden around, always quiet, always carrying too much on his small shoulders. "You okay, son?" Elijah asked, leaning on the mop handle. Zayden nodded, though his eyes said otherwise. Elijah studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You remind me of my nephew. Smart boy. Real smart. Got himself into a fancy engineering program once." "What happened?" Zayden asked. Elijah's gaze darkened. "Didn't last. Wasn't that he couldn't keep up. It's that they couldn't handle him keeping up. See, sometimes it's not about your mind, boy. It's about the box they already built for you. You try stepping out, they'll find a way to put you back in it." Zayden looked down, words failing him. Elijah nodded toward the notebook in his hand. "Whatever you're working on, be careful. They don't want you to outshine them. Not here." Zayden swallowed hard. "But if I'm right, shouldn't that matter?" Elijah smiled sadly. "You'd think so." Then he turned back to his mop, leaving Zayden standing in the empty hallway, with a heart heavier than before. By the next week, his progress on the equation had grown beyond what even he expected. Each night he filled more pages, discovering connections that even textbooks hadn't covered. He began to see the world through numbers, symmetry in shadows, patterns in speech, rhythm in everything. But with every answer came more isolation. Word had spread among students that the scholarship kid was obsessed with proving something. Rumors twisted into ridicule. Kennedy once walked past his desk and whispered, "You know they only let you in here to make the school look diverse, right?" He didn't look up. He didn't give her the reaction she wanted. He just kept writing. Still, the comments stung. Dr. Halbrook had grown colder too. He rarely called on Zayden anymore. When he did, it was always for the most difficult problems, and always with a tone that dared him to fail. Then came the day everything began to unravel. It was a Friday. The class was unusually restless, whispering about weekend plans and sports tryouts. Dr. Halbrook walked in holding a stack of graded quizzes. "Some of you did acceptable work," he began. His tone sharpened when he reached Zayden's desk. "And some of you, well, let's just say your results were surprising." He placed Zayden's quiz face down on the desk. There was no grade written on it. Zayden looked up. "Did I get something wrong?" Dr. Halbrook adjusted his glasses. "That's the thing, Mr. Thompson. You didn't." The room went silent. "In fact, you scored a perfect 100, Halbrook continued. Identical to a problem set from last year's university placement exams. A level of mastery I find difficult to believe." The insinuation was clear. Zayden's heart pounded. "I didn't cheat." Halbrook smiled faintly. That same smirk that said everything his words pretended not to. "Of course you didn't. You just happen to think exactly like graduate-level mathematicians from MIT." The class snickered. Kennedy muttered under her breath, "Guess he's not as special as he thinks." Zayden felt something burn in his chest. Not anger, but betrayal. He had done everything right, worked harder than anyone. And still the truth wasn't enough. "I studied," he said, voice trembling but steady. "I worked all week." Halbrook's expression didn't soften. "Then prove it." He motioned toward the board. "Show us your process." Zayden stood slowly, hands shaking as he picked up the chalk. The board loomed larger than before. He began to write, each line confident, methodical, his logic impeccable. The class fell silent. For a moment even Halbrook seemed caught off guard. But then the smirk returned. "Interesting," he said when Zayden finished. "Almost too polished. You expect me to believe a 10-year-old child developed this sequence alone? I didn't copy it, Zayden said firmly. Halbrook folded his arms. We'll see about that. Before Zayden could react, the teacher reached down and snatched his notebook off the desk. Pages fluttered to the floor, covered in scribbles and equations that stretched beyond the curriculum. Hey, that's mine! Zayden exclaimed. Halbrook ignored him. He flipped through the pages, his brow tightening as he skimmed the contents. Then, with a look of condescending certainty, he snapped the notebook shut. This will go to the academic review board, he said coldly. Until then, you're suspended from class participation. The air left Zayden's lungs. Around him, whispers erupted. Some students looked uneasy, others smug. Dr. Halbrook turned toward the door. Academic dishonesty is a serious offense, Mr. Thompson. I'd suggest you prepare an explanation. Zayden stood frozen, fists clenched, eyes fixed on the notebook that had been ripped from his hands, the one place where his truth still lived. As Dr. Halbrook walked away, a single page slipped from the notebook and fluttered to the floor, one with a half-finished equation. When Zayden looked closer, he saw something new scrawled in his own handwriting that he didn't remember writing. The pattern isn't mine, it's theirs. The day after Dr. Halbrook confiscated Zayden's notebook, the air at Astoria Prep was colder than usual, not by temperature, but by tension. Zayden walked the halls like a shadow that didn't belong, eyes following him, conversations dipping into silence the moment he passed. The whispers were heavier now. The ones that used to question his place were now questioning his integrity. Simone arrived at the school promptly at noon, wearing her best blouse and her nurse's ID clipped to her side. She hadn't been called in. She had requested the meeting. After Zayden came home the night before, eyes hollow, backpack light from the missing notebook, she knew something had broken loose, and she wasn't going to let them handle it behind closed doors. Principal Meredith Ward greeted her with a practiced smile. She was poised, polished, the kind of black woman who had learned how to navigate predominantly white institutions with diplomacy sharpened like glass. Her office was pristine, adorned with educational awards and a framed quote from Maya Angelou, "Still I rise." "I appreciate you coming in, Miss Thompson," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Simone sat, folding her hands tightly. "I'd appreciate it more if someone explained why my son was publicly humiliated and accused of cheating." Principal Ward didn't flinch. She nodded slowly, opening a leather folder in front of her. "Let me start by saying, we recognize Zayden's intelligence. Truly. But this situation has created disruption. Dr. Halbrook believes it warrants formal review." Simone leaned forward. "Formal review for what? Being brilliant? Or being a brilliant black child?" Ward hesitated. Not long, but enough to feel like a crack in the wall. "There's a process," she said carefully. "When a student's performance deviates significantly from their previous work or the curriculum level, it triggers an integrity protocol. It's not personal, it's standard." Simone narrowed her eyes. "Standard for all students?" Ward looked away, just for a second. "I understand how this looks. But my position requires balance. I have to manage perceptions on both sides." That word, perceptions, hung in the air like poison. Simone's voice dropped. "My son didn't cheat. He didn't copy. He's gifted. And you know it." Principal Ward's smile faltered for the first time. She closed the folder gently and leaned back in her chair. The mask began to slip. "Ms. Thompson," she said, softer now, "Zayden is exceptional. But this school wasn't built for exceptions. It was built for traditions, structures. He's pushing too fast, too loud." Simone blinked. "So he should what? Slow down? Dim his light?" Ward sighed. "I'm asking you to help him fit in. Just for now. Let him adjust. Let them adjust to him." Simone stood abruptly. Her voice trembled with restrained fury. "You're asking me to tell my son to shrink himself so the world feels comfortable. That's not how he was raised. And I didn't come here to beg for crumbs. I came for his notebook. And a damn apology." Ward didn't rise. She only clasped her hands together and said the words that sealed the moment. "We'll see what the board decides." Meanwhile, Zayden sat alone in the guidance counselor's waiting room, knees bouncing with nerves. The counselor, Ms. Ramsey, kept checking her email instead of speaking to him. He wasn't there for help. He was there to be supervised. A placeholder until the board decided his fate. Students passed by the glass door. Some stared. Some laughed. A few simply looked through him. That morning, Someone had taped a fake math genius cheat sheet to his locker, complete with childish scribbles pretending to be equations. Zayden didn't tear it down. He left it there, a symbol of the joke he had become to them, and the truth they couldn't handle. Inside, though, a war was brewing. The problem that started it all still lived in his mind. Even without his notebook, the equation was alive, stretching across neurons like electricity. And in that waiting room, something clicked. A piece he hadn't seen before, a pattern inside the pattern. His fingers twitched. He needed paper. He pulled a pamphlet from the table, College Readiness Tips, and flipped it over. Using a dull pencil from his backpack, he started scribbling along the margins. Lines, slopes, coefficients. The page began to fill. His pulse quickened. Then the door opened. Dr. Halbrook stood there, arms crossed. "Come with me." The disciplinary hearing was small, just Principal Ward, Dr. Halbrook, and a school board liaison named Mr. Peters, a balding man, in a beige suit, who smelled faintly of pipe smoke. Zayden was seated at the end of a long conference table, like a defendant on trial. They didn't ask him how he was feeling. They didn't ask him about the equation. They asked him why he had chosen to work outside the assigned curriculum. "I didn't choose it," Zayden said. "I just saw it differently." Dr. Halbrook leaned forward. "Do you expect us to believe that a 10-year-old child independently developed solutions to a postgraduate level problem with no assistance?" Zayden looked at him squarely. "I didn't ask you to believe me. I just did the math." Peters cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson, our concern isn't just the work. It's the impact. This situation has disrupted the class dynamic. Other students feel uncomfortable." There it was, the unspoken truth. His brilliance made them uncomfortable. Word spoke next. "Given everything, and in the interest of maintaining classroom order, we're implementing a temporary reassignment. Zayden will no longer attend Dr. Halbrook's class until the review concludes." Zayden froze. "What does that mean?" he asked, voice cracking. Halbrook answered plainly. "It means you're banned from advanced mathematics. Indefinitely." Simone's voice exploded from the doorway. She had arrived just in time to hear it.
"You what?"
The room turned. She stormed in, eyes blazing. "You're punishing him for being better than what you expected. That's all this is. You couldn't imagine that he solved it, not because it's impossible, but because he wasn't supposed to." Miss Thompson Ward began. "No," Simone snapped. "I know what this is. I've seen it before. The moment a black child dares to outpace the expectations set for him, he becomes a threat instead of a success." Peters tried to interject. "This is standard." "Don't lie to me," Simone said. "This is racism dressed in policy." She turned to Ward, her voice quieter now but trembling. "You should have protected him, but you're too busy surviving in their system to remember who you are." Ward said nothing. The meeting ended without resolution, but the damage was done. Zayden was barred from attending any math class. They didn't expel him, but they made sure he couldn't touch the subject he loved. A silent suspension. A slow suffocation. As they walked out, Simone wrapped her arm around her son. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have seen it coming." Zayden didn't answer. His mind wasn't on what he had lost. It was on what he was starting to uncover in that quiet space beyond rejection, where numbers still spoke and truth still lived. That night, a mysterious envelope was slipped under their apartment door. Inside was a copy of the equation, solved halfway, with a note, "I've seen this before. Meet me." The photo had been snapped without permission, grainy, tilted, and cruelly timed. It showed Zayden in front of the chalkboard, mid-sentence, eyes wide with concentration. The equation loomed behind him, like a wall of foreign symbols. But what made it explode wasn't the math. It was the caption. "Affirmative action, genius." The post was uploaded by a student named Caleb Barnes, a junior from a wealthy family, whose father chaired one of Astoria Prep's donor committees. Within minutes, the image began circulating through private student group chats. By noon it had leapt onto Twitter, Reddit, and anonymous message boards. The quote spread like wildfire, igniting comment sections with racial sarcasm, thinly veiled mockery, and open hatred. One reply read, "Let me guess he solved it using feelings and diversity points." Another, "The equation isn't the joke. The fact that anyone thinks this kid belongs in that classroom is." The cruelty wasn't just verbal, it was visual. Meme pages started photoshopping his face onto celebrities with math backgrounds, overlaying phrases like "Harvard's next hoax" and "black excellence" or "black privilege." Some used monkey imagery. Others mocked his expressions. By the time Simone arrived home from work that evening, her phone was vibrating nonstop. Text from coworkers, DMs from relatives, links to the post forwarded with caution and concern. She dropped her purse on the floor and went straight to Zayden's room. He was sitting on his bed, phone in hand, eyes vacant. "Zayden?" she said gently. He didn't respond. She sat beside him and looked at the screen. It was filled with laughing emojis. A TikTok remix of the photo, set to circus music. Simone took the phone, hands shaking. "Who did this?"
It doesn't matter, he murmured.
"They all think it's funny." Simone stood up, her rage bubbling beneath her skin. She opened her laptop and began deleting every public profile she had. Facebook, Instagram, even her old blog with Zayden's baby pictures. Within minutes their digital presence had gone dark, a desperate attempt to contain the wildfire. But it was already too late. By morning, the media had picked it up. A popular right-wing pundit posted the image with the caption, "Another woke school pushing fake prodigies for virtue points." Meanwhile, real students are overlooked. Cable news hosts debated whether Zayden was being propped up by race politics. Anonymous callers flooded the school's voicemail, demanding answers about the curriculum. Parents began pulling their children from math class until the situation was handled. Atoria Prep issued a sterile press release. "We are aware of a post circulating online regarding one of our students. We are reviewing the matter internally." They never mentioned Zayden by name. In the hallway, he was no longer mocked with whispers. He was avoided entirely. Students veered away like he carried disease. Teachers hesitated before calling on him, as if his presence invited scrutiny they weren't ready for. The damage wasn't limited to school. Simone's hospital supervisor pulled her aside. "Some of our patients have seen the post," he said. "They're asking questions. We just need to make sure this doesn't become a reflection on your professionalism." Simone stared at him, stunned. "My professionalism. Just a formality," he added, smiling too quickly. "But you might want to lay low for a while." 3 nights after the photo went viral, someone keyed Simone's car. A single word, carved deep into the paint: "Liar." Zayden saw it first, when he went out to take the trash. He stood there staring at the word, the letters jagged and vicious. Simone rushed out when he didn't return, her face pale when she saw what had been done.
They didn't file a police report. They both knew how that would go.
Instead, they drove in silence to a 24-hour car wash and scrubbed until the paint bled. But amid the noise, somewhere far away from Atoria Prep, in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, someone else saw the post. Someone who didn't laugh. Professor Langston Reed hadn't taught in years. Once a rising star in Ivy League mathematics, he had walked away after a series of battles with his department over discriminatory grading practices and curriculum exclusion. His name had been quietly erased from academic journals. Now he tutored students part-time and wrote anonymous blogs about educational injustice. That night he was scrolling through Reddit when the image caught his eye. The chalkboard. The numbers. He leaned forward, heart thudding. The equation. It wasn't just familiar. It was identical to a problem he had encountered at a European math symposium more than a decade ago. A problem that had been presented by a Polish mathematician, but Reed had always suspected the theory had been lifted from an unpublished manuscript written by a black doctoral student who mysteriously dropped out the following year. He saved the image, zooming in on Zayden's face. There was something behind the eyes, not arrogance, not attention-seeking, just clarity, focus, and pain. Reed sat back, heart racing. "Who is this kid?" he whispered to himself. He opened a private browser, typed in Zayden's name, and found the school's page. No mention, no profile, just a few lines about the school's commitment to diversity and excellence. He opened his email, typed, deleted, typed again. To Atoria Prep admin. Subject: Equation on chalkboard. "I am a former professor of mathematics and educational equity. I recognize the problem in the viral image circulating this week. I believe the student depicted has made meaningful progress on a problem long considered unsolvable. I request immediate contact with the student's guardian. This may be bigger than your institution is prepared to handle." He hovered over send, then hit it. Back in Atlanta, Zayden was sitting on the floor, surrounded by torn-out notebook pages, when his mother walked in. "You need to take a break," she said gently. "I can't," he replied, eyes locked on the latest sequence. "It's all in my head now." Even if I stop writing, it's still there. Simone sat down beside him. She didn't understand the math, but she understood the obsession, because it wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about control, about reclaiming the narrative that had been hijacked. That night, she left her phone on the charger in the kitchen. When she checked it the next morning, there was a missed call from a New York number, and a voicemail. "This is Professor Langston Reed. I believe your son may be working on a problem that I've been following for years. I think we need to talk." As Simone pressed play again, her phone buzzed with a new notification. Zayden Thompson, the fraud genius, trending N3 Nation. The voicemail sat on Simone's phone like a seed of possibility in a desert of despair. Professor Langston Reed's voice, deep and deliberate, echoed in her mind long after she'd played the message 3 times. He didn't sound like the others. Not like the reporters fishing for quotes, or the parents clutching their pearls over academic integrity. His tone had gravity, precision, a kind of reverence. She called him back that same evening. "Miss Thompson," he said, answering after one ring. "I've been waiting to hear from you." His voice carried the weight of years spent in rooms that tried to silence him, and now it reached across state lines, breaking into their life like light through a shuttered window. "I don't know what you've seen," Simone said cautiously, "but this whole thing has turned into a circus. My son's being torn apart online, and in real life they've taken everything from him except his mind." Langston was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's why I want to help him use it. Not just to finish the equation, but to understand why they never wanted him to touch it in the first place." Simone's breath caught. He continued, "The math is only half the problem. The other half is the world trying to erase the fact that someone like him can do it." They talked for an hour. Langston explained that he'd been tracking the equation ever since he encountered it in a private international seminar hosted by a European think tank. He believed it had been stolen, its roots buried in an unpublished thesis by a black student whose work mysteriously vanished after accusations of academic fraud. "He was buried the same way they're trying to bury your son," Langston said flatly. Simone didn't hesitate. "What do you need from us?" "Just a place to start," he replied. "And the truth. Unfiltered." 2 nights later, Langston flew into Atlanta. He didn't book a hotel. He stayed at a modest Airbnb a few blocks from Simone's apartment. When he arrived at their doorstep, wearing a tattered leather satchel and a tweed coat that smelled faintly of pipe smoke, Zayden was already waiting. "You look like a professor," Zayden said, eyeing the old-school briefcase. Langston chuckled. "You look like a question no one knows how to answer yet." They shook hands like men twice their age. The mentorship began in secret. Langston didn't want the school involved. He didn't trust them. They met 3 nights a week at the back of a local library, tucked in a quiet corner with cracked wooden tables and a flickering overhead light. Langston didn't start with formulas or drills. He began with systems. "Patterns don't exist in a vacuum," he told Zayden. "They exist because of pressure, oppression, resistance. Look at the world. That's where math lives." He taught Zayden through real-world models, redlining maps converted into data curves, incarceration rates mapped through exponential decay, wealth gaps as asymptotic distributions. He wasn't just teaching Zayden to solve, he was teaching him to see. Zayden devoured it. Every lesson ignited something, a connection, a spark. He began seeing the original equation, not as a mystery, but a language, not as a wall, but a mirror. They studied at night, and by day Zayden kept his head low. The school allowed him back into electives, but barred him from any mathematics. His desk in the math wing remained empty, a quiet punishment meant to make him disappear. But while the school tried to cut off the stem, they hadn't realized Zayden had already taken root. Langston brought books with titles Zayden had never heard before: Chaos Theory and the Social Order, Mathematical Resistance, The Geometry of Rebellion. Each one reshaped how Zayden thought, not just about numbers but about power. "You're not just solving math," Langston would say. "You're rewriting who gets to claim mastery over it." Simone watched from the sidelines, with cautious awe. She kept dinner warm on steady nights, and drove them when the library closed early. One evening after they returned home, she pulled Langston aside. "Is this safe?" she asked quietly. Langston looked at her. "What they're doing to him isn't safe, but what we're doing, it's necessary." She nodded, but her eyes remained glassy. "They already see him as dangerous. What happens when he actually proves them wrong?" Langston didn't answer. He didn't need to. 3 weeks into their sessions, something shifted. Langston had just handed Zayden a stack of handwritten notes, disjointed fragments of the unsolvable equation from over a decade ago. Some were written in Polish, others in the shorthand of a mathematician long forgotten. These are the last known records, he explained. From the student I told your mom about, they never finished it. But they were closer than anyone ever gave them credit for. Zayden spread the pages out across the table, eyes scanning the chaos. Numbers, symbols, diagrams. It looked like madness. Then, slowly, he began rearranging them. He didn't even realize what he was doing at first. His fingers moved instinctively. Sections from one page mirrored fragments from another. A curve here complemented a variable there. What once seemed disconnected began to lock into place like a jigsaw puzzle, but one that required seeing around corners. Langston leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Zayden, what are you doing? Zayden didn't answer. His pencil darted across the page, not copying, translating. He merged three distinct equations into a single shape, then inverted it along an axis. Then came silence. He stepped back, looked again, and whispered, "That's the core. It's not chaos, it's rhythm." Langston's hands trembled as he picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the symbols, disbelief slowly giving way to awe.
You cracked it, he muttered. You cracked the core.
Zayden didn't smile. He just stared at the page like it had always been waiting for him. But just as Langston turned to call Simone over, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "They're watching the library cameras. You need to move, now." The warning came through Langston's phone, like a thunderclap in the middle of a quiet revelation. He read the message twice, his pulse quickening. "They're watching the library cameras. You need to move, now." He didn't know who had sent it. The number was scrambled. No name, no trace. But he didn't doubt it. Not for a second. He looked at Zayden, who was still staring at the page that had just changed everything. "Pack up," Langston said, his voice low but urgent. "We're not meeting here anymore." Within minutes, the pages were stuffed into folders. Zayden's pencil tucked into his pocket like a soldier sheathing a weapon. They walked out without looking back, past the dusty shelves and blinking exit sign. But as they stepped into the parking lot, Langston scanned the street. His instincts weren't wrong. A black SUV sat idling across the road, tinted windows, engine running but no one exiting. They didn't stop to ask questions. Langston drove Zayden home himself, saying little, eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. The next morning, Simone found her car keyed again. Deeper this time, with a word etched into the driver's side in jagged letters. Cheater. It was the third act of vandalism in 2 weeks. First, the slashed tires, then the broken taillight. Now this. Zayden stood next to her in the apartment parking lot, hands clenched, face expressionless. "They want us scared," Simone said softly, barely above a whisper. "But they don't know who they're playing with." But inside, fear was curling in her chest like smoke she couldn't exhale. That same day, an unmarked envelope appeared in their mailbox. Inside, a single typed note. No return address. No fingerprints. "Your son will never be one of them. Keep pushing, and he'll disappear like the rest." Simone didn't show it to Zayden. She didn't need to. He already knew. The threats weren't limited to home. At school, students were whispering louder now. Not about the math, but about him. "My dad says he's faking it. I heard he hacked into some professor's files. Why's he still here if he's so smart?" The administration, cornered by angry calls from wealthy white parents, called for an emergency disciplinary review. The reason? Disruptive academic behavior. Langston sat beside Simone and Zayden at the review board hearing, dressed in a crisp suit that barely concealed his rage. Across from them sat 3 school board members, all white, all visibly uncomfortable. "We've received substantial concern from parents," said Mr. Walters, the board chair. "There's growing unrest, allegations of misconduct, inappropriate competition methods." "He hasn't competed in anything," Langston interrupted. "But the nature of his progress," Walters continued, "has become a distraction to faculty, to students, to donors." There it was, not about education, about image. Zayden spoke for himself. "I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't cheat. I solved a problem because I couldn't not solve it. That's who I am." The room went quiet. But when the vote came, it wasn't for expulsion. Not yet. The board issued a formal recommendation that Zayden be barred from participating in any advanced academic activities without direct faculty supervision. Langston leaned over, whispering in Simone's ear. They just put a cage around his mind. Simone stood up slowly, her eyes meeting the board. You're afraid of a 10-year-old because he doesn't know his place. That's what this is. But you're going to regret trying to silence him. They walked out together, past the receptionist who couldn't meet their eyes, past students pretending not to watch. Later that week, Langston called in a favor, one he'd been holding for years. He reached out to the National Youth Math Consortium, a prestigious competition platform with international reach. He sent them clips of Zayden's work, unpublished fragments, the partial solution that cracked the decades-old equation's core. After days of silence, the reply came late at night. We've never seen anything like this. We want to see more. But for his safety, we'll accept him under an alias. Zayden sat across the table, as Langston read the email aloud. So, I compete, Zayden said, not as a question, as a statement. Yes, Langston replied, but no one will know it's you. Not the public, not the school. You'll be a ghost in their system. Zayden looked at his mother. She gave him a single nod. And so, a new identity was born. A. Sterling, a name built from the ashes of being erased. They practiced harder than ever. Langston turned their apartment into a math war room. The living room wall was covered in taped-up equations, timelines of great black mathematicians who had been ignored, algorithms broken into color-coded layers. But this time, the training wasn't just about math. It was about resilience. You're not just competing against students, Langston told him. You're competing against doubt. Simone made sure Zayden stayed fed, hydrated and slept, at least enough to stay sharp. But the nights were long, the air heavy. One night, Zayden paused mid-problem, pencil hovering. They won't believe it's me, even if I win, he said quietly. Langston looked up. Then don't win for them. Win for you, for the kids who never even made it this far. Zayden nodded, and kept writing. The day of the competition arrived. It was virtual, but live, broadcast on secure academic servers. Contestants' identities hidden. Only numbers. Zayden sat in the dim glow of Langston's laptop, headphones on, blank screen before him. He wore a hoodie pulled low, fingers tapping the table nervously. The problems began rolling in. At first, algebraic fundamentals, warm-ups, then combinatorics, number theory, differential models. Zayden moved like water. Every answer precise, every move purposeful. At the halfway mark, Langston whispered, "You're leading." Zayden didn't smile. He just focused. Then came the final problem, the one no one was expected to solve. Zayden read it once, twice. Then something flickered in his eyes. Langston leaned closer, breath held. "What is it?" Zayden whispered. "It's a mutation of the equation. The one from the board?" Zayden nodded, but distorted, like someone tried to replicate it and failed. He cracked his knuckles, stretched his neck, and began to write. As Zayden typed the final line of his solution, the competition server froze, then crashed. On the screen appeared a single line of text. A. Sterling is disqualified due to irregular algorithmic activity. The moment the competition server crashed, time itself seemed to fracture. Langston stared at the frozen screen in disbelief. The cursor blinked beneath the error message, like a taunt. A. Sterling is disqualified due to irregular algorithmic activity. Zayden leaned back in his chair, stunned. Not because the platform had glitched, but because he'd seen it coming. In the pit of his stomach, he had known from the beginning that the game wasn't built for him to win. Langston sprang into action, snapping photos of the screen, the timer and the equation. "They're not going to bury this," he said, jaw tight. "We'll get this overturned. They have no grounds." Zayden didn't respond. He stared at the screen like it had swallowed a part of him. Later that night, after Simone had fallen asleep with a wet towel pressed to her forehead and exhaustion carved deep into her face, Langston sat alone in the apartment kitchen, scanning through the consortium's internal policies. Then his phone buzzed. "Unknown number. We know who A. Sterling is. Let him prove himself in the open. Trials begin in 5 days. Atlanta Convention Center. No aliases." Langston read it again, then again. It wasn't a request. 5 days later, Zayden stood in front of the Atlanta Convention Center, wearing a blue blazer 2 sizes too big, and a name tag that read, Zayden Thompson. No masks, no anonymity. This time they would see him. The national math trials were more than a competition. They were a spectacle. Cameras from major academic networks lined the arena. Banners of sponsors hung from the rafters. Rows of white chairs were filled with proud parents and recruiters from the top STEM academies in the nation. Langston stood beside Zayden at the registration table, tension knotting in his shoulder. "This is their stage," he said quietly. "But you still control the performance." Zayden gave a small nod, but his eyes were already scanning the arena. He saw faces that flickered with recognition, some from the viral post, others from the hate threads. There were whispers, phone screens raised, teachers with badges whispering to each other and pointing. Every other finalist was white. Blazers, loafers, and laptop bags hung over arms like inherited privilege. Some of them laughed as they walked past Zayden. One boy, blonde and sharp-chinned, smirked as he made eye contact. "You're the one from the memes, right?" he said, his voice just loud enough to carry. "Glad they let you try again. Gives the rest of us a head start." Zayden didn't answer. He just kept walking. Inside the main auditorium, a massive digital board displayed names and ranks. Each finalist would compete in rounds, elimination style. Problems were broadcast live on overhead projectors. Solutions would be submitted in real time through digital tablets provided on each desk. Langston found a seat in the second row, eyes sharp, phone camera ready. Simone sat beside him, heart thudding like a war drum in her chest. She gripped her purse tighter than necessary. When Zayden took his seat among the 12 finalists, the room shifted. Some parents leaned forward. Others exchanged glances. One woman actually shook her head. But the boy in the oversized blazer didn't flinch. The first round began. A set of logic puzzles, intricate but solvable. Zayden answered in half the time of the others. The judges whispered. One typed rapidly on a laptop, likely fact-checking his speed. Second round, probabilistic modeling. Again, he breezed through. Third round, algorithmic design based on real-world environmental systems. This time, they tried to shake him. The problem involved converting water pollution data into predictive equations. It was based on a real disaster, the Flint water crisis. Zayden recognized the source immediately. A setup to test not just skill but memory. He knew it by heart. He finished first again. By the end of the third round, Zayden's name hovered near the top of the leaderboard. Then came the break. Langston met him backstage with a bottle of water. "You're rattling them," he said, trying to keep his voice even. Zayden wiped sweat from his forehead. "They won't let me win." Langston paused. "Maybe not, but that's not why you're here anymore." Zayden looked at him, something deeper in his eyes now. Not anger, not even hunger. Conviction. Final round. The stage lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed through the auditorium. "This last problem has never been solved in competition. It was submitted by an anonymous contributor to this year's panel. Consider this, your crucible." The screen flickered. Then it appeared. The equation. His equation. The one Dr. Halbrook had scrawled across the chalkboard on Zayden's first day. The one that started it all. The one he had cracked in the silence of shame. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few students leaned back. One competitor visibly sighed, shaking his head. Langston's chest tightened. Simone whispered, That's his." Zayden's hands didn't shake. He raised the stylus to the tablet. He wasn't that same boy anymore. Not the one laughed at, mocked, erased. This time he wasn't standing at the back of a classroom. He was in the lion's den, and he was walking straight toward the beast. The room faded. It was just him and the numbers. He began writing. The logic poured from him like music, every step deliberate, every connection earned. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't performing. He was completing something that had once been used to humiliate him. Row by row, his answer grew. Elegant, brutal in its precision. Time ticked down. 5 minutes. 4. 3. He submitted with 2 minutes to spare. The judges stared at their screens. One removed his glasses. Another whispered something into a headset. The head judge leaned toward the microphone, then stopped. A quiet buzz filled the room. A technician walked onto stage, whispering something to the moderator. Langston sat forward. Simone gripped his arm. The moderator cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appear to have a technical discrepancy with one of the final answers." Zayden's name flashed on screen. The moderator's voice returned. "We're currently verifying authenticity. Please remain seated." Backstage, Zayden watched the judges gather in a huddle. One of them held a printed copy of his solution. But it wasn't blank. Someone had already signed it. The initials at the bottom read. The silence in the auditorium stretched so long, it became a presence of its own. Judges whispered, Spectators leaned forward, unsure if they were watching a victory or the beginnings of a cover-up. The massive projection screen still displayed Zayden's name at the top of the leaderboard, and his solution hovered beside it, a stunning, impossible configuration of logic, symmetry, and brilliance. And yet confusion spread like smoke. Backstage, Langston Reed stood motionless, watching the flurry of officials and assistants form a quiet, frantic circle around the head judge. One man, thin, gray-haired, with a Yale pin on his lapel, clutched Zayden's solution in his trembling hands. At the bottom, barely visible in faded ink, were the initials K. Langston's stomach dropped. K.H. Kent Halbrook, the same man who once told Zayden to sit down. The man who had declared the problem unsolvable. And now somehow his name was on Zayden's answer. Langston stepped closer, careful not to be seen. He slipped his phone from his pocket and tapped the record button. He knew what this was. They weren't verifying anything. They were scrambling, not to confirm Zayden's genius, but to erase it. Inside the judge's circle, the whispers began to sharpen. "This is political suicide," one said. "Do you understand what it means if he wins? People are watching," another hissed. "We can't disqualify him without cause." The older man holding the paper shook his head. "This isn't about cause. It's about optics. He solves a problem no one else could, and we're supposed to hand him the crown. After the controversy, he's not the face we wanted," a third judge muttered. Langston's hand clenched around his phone. His thumb hovered over the end recording button, but he didn't press it. He knew this moment mattered, because this time, they were caught in real time. Out on the floor, Zayden sat silently in his chair, still staring at the blinking cursor on his tablet. Around him, other competitors whispered to one another, watching the commotion with thinly veiled curiosity. One boy leaned toward another and said, "I told you, they're never gonna let him win." The scoreboard hadn't changed. His name still sat on top, glowing in brilliant white against a field of gray. Simone sat frozen in the second row, her fingers locked together like a prayer she couldn't afford to say out loud. Finally, the moderator stepped forward, adjusting the mic with shaking hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "after further review, we can now confirm that contestant Zayden Thompson has successfully completed the final problem." The room didn't cheer. Not yet. There was too much tension, too much waiting for permission to react. Then, slowly, one judge stood. Then another. Then, shockingly, a third. They began to applaud, reluctantly, stiffly. But the sound grew, row by row. Hands clapping. A ripple of sound that filled the air with something that wasn't quite celebration, more like surrender. Zayden remained seated. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just watched them. The people who had doubted him, mocked him, erased him, rise to their feet. A standing ovation. Not because they wanted to. Because they had no choice. Langston slipped away from backstage, phone still recording, heart thundering in his chest. He didn't stop until he reached the lobby, where he leaned against a wall, breathless. Then he uploaded the recording to a private server, encrypted it, and sent it to 3 journalists he trusted from his years of academic activism. Each email had the same subject line: "He was never meant to win, but he did." And then he hit send. Within hours, the video was viral, posted by a small independent news outlet. It included the full audio of the judges discussing how to undermine Zayden's victory, with clear voices and phrases that sent social media into a firestorm. "He's not the face we wanted. This isn't about cause. It's about optics." The backlash was immediate. Major academic organizations issued statements condemning the remarks. Hashtags flooded every platform. "Let Zayden win. Math is not white. He solved it." Astoria Prep remained silent. Too silent. Until reporters showed up at their gates, demanding comment. Langston, Simone, and Zayden returned home to a swarm of flashing lights and questions. But Simone held the line. "He didn't cheat," she told a camera outside their door. "He just outgrew the box they put him in." Meanwhile, inside the headquarters of the National Math Trials, emergency meetings were held. The judges responsible were placed on immediate leave. An emergency press conference was scheduled. Langston watched it from the Thompson living room, arms crossed.
The head of the trials committee, a younger woman with tears in her voice, stood at the podium.
"We failed this year," she said. "We failed to rise above bias, and we failed Zayden Thompson. But he rose anyway, and for that we owe him not just a trophy, but an apology." Back at the convention center, The awards ceremony was delayed but not cancelled. When Zayden took the stage to accept his medal, the crowd didn't just cheer. They erupted. This time, the applause wasn't forced. It was raw, wild. People were crying. Teachers from rival schools stood. Cameras flashed not to exploit, but to document. He accepted the medal, but said nothing. Then Langston joined him on stage and leaned into the mic. Brilliance should never need permission. But even as the cheers rang out, and the world finally gave Zayden what he had earned, Simone's phone buzzed in her purse. A blocked number. One new voicemail. She stepped away from the noise to play it. "Your boy embarrassed powerful people. This isn't over. Watch your door." Simone looked up, and across the street, parked in the shadows, sat the same black SUV from weeks ago, engine running. The black SUV across the street didn't move. Its headlights remained off. Its engine barely audible. Simone stood frozen in the doorway of the Atlanta Convention Center, clutching her phone like it could shield her from the chill crawling up her spine. Inside, Zayden was being swarmed by reporters, flashbulbs, and outstretched microphones, the new poster child of genius and controversy. But outside, Simone felt something darker, the kind of tension you don't see on camera, the kind that simmers behind smiles and headlines. She stepped back into the building, but not before snapping a photo of the SUV's plate, just in case. Within 24 hours, the recording Langston had leaked hit every major outlet in the country. CNN titled it, "The Equation They Tried to Bury." Fox News dubbed it, "Math or Marxism, When Wokeness Meets Academia." BuzzFeed ran, 10 things to know about Zayden Thompson, the boy who solved the problem that solved us. Cable talk shows pounced. Morning panels debated whether Zayden's victory was earned or orchestrated. One conservative anchor sneered into the camera, "This isn't about math, it's about narrative." And once again, the media is elevating a symbol to distract from real merit. On the other side, civil rights advocates flooded the airwaves. The NAACP called the leaked audio undeniable proof that institutional racism isn't just alive, it's on stage, wearing a judge's badge. Black STEM professionals rallied behind Zayden, launching the hashtag, "Let Him Shine." Protest formed outside Astoria Prep, divided and loud. On one side, parents and students holding signs that read, "Math doesn't care about race. Merit over melanin." On the other, "Brilliance looks like Zayden. And he solved it. You just couldn't handle it." The school became a battleground. Police barricades were installed. Media vans camped out in the parking lot. Helicopters circled overhead during lunch periods. Students were advised not to engage with protesters. Teachers were told to avoid discussing the scandal in class. Zayden still wasn't allowed back into his math class. At home, the Thompson apartment became a fortress. Simone changed their locks. Langston installed a camera by the door. Zayden's windows stayed covered. Even during the day, Simone deleted her social media again, this time permanently. The messages were unbearable. Some were threats. Others pretended to be offers of help, only to slide into racism disguised as concern. One message read, "Keep your son safe. Pull him out before someone else does." Another, "You're weaponizing him. And when the world moves on, it'll be your fault he can't survive." Zayden didn't cry. He didn't lash out. But he stopped speaking as much, stopped asking to go outside. His equations slowed. His appetite thinned. One night, Simone found him standing in the hallway at 2 a.m., just staring at the front door. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "I keep hearing cars," he whispered. "Even when there aren't any." She pulled him close. "They're not going to touch you. I promise." But she knew promises didn't stop hate. Langston tried to keep Zayden's mind engaged. He brought in math historians, coded letters from black mathematicians of the past, even arranged a Zoom call with a retired NASA engineer who'd seen the Apollo missions through racist exclusion. "You're not just solving numbers," the engineer told him. "You're solving centuries." But the more America talked about Zayden, the less anyone talked to him. Then the unexpected twist arrived. C-SPAN announced a breaking development. Congressional subcommittee launches formal investigation into academic discrimination following viral math trial controversy. A hearing was scheduled, fast-tracked, public. The topic, race, merit, and the modern academic gatekeeping crisis. Simone stared at the television, stunned. "They're calling this a crisis," she said. "You're the crisis." Zayden said nothing. Langston paced the living room. "They're not looking for answers. They're looking for someone to blame. We need to be ready. Simone turned to him. Are you saying we shouldn't go? Langston hesitated. I'm saying they're going to try to make an example out of him, either as a fraud or as a token. Simone looked at her son, who had curled up silently on the couch, headphones in. No, she said. He's not anyone's example. He's the proof. In the days leading up to the hearing, a media war exploded. Op-eds swarmed every major paper. Think pieces from professors, political commentators, activists, and even former mathletes. One article accused Simone of pushing her son into a spotlight he never asked for. Another claimed Zayden was a manufactured genius groomed for liberal narrative fulfillment. A third called him a once-in-a-century talent proving America wrong. Some tried to stay neutral. Most failed. The attention became a storm, impossible to escape, impossible to endure. Then came the email from the subcommittee. Zayden had been formally requested to testify. The night before their flight to D.C., Langston, Simone, and Zayden sat in silence. Langston finally spoke. They'll try to interrupt you, talk over you, confuse you. I know, Zayden said. Simone squeezed his hand. Just speak the truth. Even if your voice shakes. Zayden looked at them both. It won't shake. The morning of the hearing, they walked into the Capitol building flanked by cameras, security guards, and attention so thick it felt like fog. Inside, the hearing room was full, rows of Congress members, some leaning forward in curiosity, others arms crossed in skepticism. The chairwoman, a black congresswoman from Georgia, opened the session. We are here today to confront the question that haunts every child who dares to rise. Is America truly prepared for black brilliance? Zayden was the last to speak. He walked to the microphone, spine straight, no notes in hand. The room went still. My name is Zayden Thompson, he said. I'm 10 years old. I solved a problem that grown men said couldn't be solved. And when I did, they said it wasn't mine. A murmur spread. I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I just looked at the numbers, and they made sense. But what didn't make sense, what still doesn't, is why the truth scared everyone so much. Cameras zoomed in. Pens froze mid-sentence. I was told to sit down. I was told to fit in. I was told I didn't belong. But math doesn't care where you come from. People do. Langston's eyes burned. Simone's hands trembled. Zayden finished. I'm not here to be your symbol, or your threat. I'm just here because I refuse to disappear. As the room burst into whispers, the chairwoman's aide approached her with a folder, marked confidential. Inside, a new document, a leaked transcript from Atoria Prep's boardroom, revealing that Zayden's scholarship had been slated for quiet revocation, even before the cheating scandal began. The moment the Congressional hearing ended, Zayden became more than a name. He became a movement. But with every movement, there are those who scramble to sanitize their history, reframe their role, and distance themselves from the shame now spotlighted for the world to see. Dr. Kent Halbrook had been silent throughout the firestorm. While Zayden's face flooded social media feeds and TV panels dissected every word from the hearing, Halbrook remained behind the scenes, his silence more suspicious than strategic. But silence, he realized, had an expiration date. So, when he appeared on a major Sunday morning news show, seated across from a trusted network anchor, America finally saw the man who once told Zayden Thompson to sit down and stay in his place. The anchor opened gently. Dr. Halbrook, your name has been at the center of this national education debate. What do you want to say to the American public? Halbrook, dressed in a navy suit and tie clipped with the Atoria Prep logo, leaned in. His voice was soft, controlled. I want to clarify that I've always believed in Zayden's potential, he said. I saw promise early on, and I pushed him because I knew he could rise to the challenge. My methods may not always align with public sentiment, but they were rooted in academic rigor, not bias. Simone watched the broadcast from their apartment, remote trembling in her hand. Langston stood behind her, arms folded. He's rewriting the script, he said coldly. But Zayden said nothing. He didn't even look angry. He looked exhausted. I never discouraged him, Halbrook continued. I was strict, yes, but that's how I've treated all students. We can't conflate discipline with discrimination. The interview ended with soft piano music, the anchor thanking him for his honest reflection. By evening, headlines blared. Halbrook breaks silence. I pushed Zayden because I believed in him. Educator under fire speaks out, defends integrity. But America wasn't buying it. Within hours, a former Astoria Prep student posted a shaky cell phone video from 2 years ago. In it, Halbrook could be heard dismissing a black student's answer with a snide, "Maybe try again once you've caught up with the rest of the class." Another video surfaced, this time Halbrook joking with colleagues in the faculty lounge. "These DEI kids can barely handle algebra. But sure, let's put them in AP Calc." The internet erupted. Former students began sharing anonymous stories, years of racist grading patterns, microaggressions buried in teachable moments, and extra help offered only to students who looked like donors' children. One tweet from a biracial alumna went viral. "Dr. Halbrook made me redo an entire semester's work because he said my final paper sounded too advanced. I was a..." Astoria Prep's inbox overflowed. Alumni rescinded donations. Parents began emailing en masse, demanding answers. One mother posted on Facebook, "We trusted Astoria with our children's education. We didn't realize we were paying for silence and segregation." Within 3 days, over a dozen families pulled their children out of the school. The school board held an emergency closed-door session. Reporters circled the campus. A group of students staged a sit-in outside the administrative building, holding signs that read, "We saw, we heard, we remember." Astoria protects racists, not students. Simone was invited to speak at the next board meeting. She declined. "I don't want an apology from them," she told Langston. "I want them to feel the fear they tried to make my son live with." But Langston attended, and he didn't hold back. He walked to the podium, calm but burning. "Zayden Thompson wasn't your problem," he said. "He was your proof. Proof that your system rewards compliance and punishes excellence when it doesn't come in the right skin. And now your mask is slipping." The audience burst into applause. Behind closed doors, the board voted. The results leaked within hours. Principal Meredith Ward was fired. Dr. Kent Halbrook was placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending investigation. Astoria Prep issued a brief press release, thick with euphemisms and evasions. "We are committed to reviewing our leadership and ensuring that our values align with our community's expectations." It wasn't enough. A group of students demanded Halbrook's full termination. Others called for an audit of 5 years' worth of grades and scholarship decisions. The student newspaper published a special edition titled, "The Curriculum of Silence: Astoria's Quiet History of Academic Gatekeeping." Inside the Thompson apartment, the atmosphere was heavy but calm. For the first time in weeks, no reporters rang the bell. No protesters camped outside. No strange cars waited across the street. Simone stirred soup on the stove, her shoulders slowly unclenching. Zayden sat at the kitchen table, sketching something on a piece of graph paper. "What are you working on?" Simone asked gently. Zayden looked up. "Nothing big," he said. "Just something I want to teach." She tilted her head. "Teach?" He nodded. "I was thinking, maybe we could start a class. Not just for kids like me, for kids who think like me." Langston, walking into the room with a stack of mail, paused. "That's not nothing, Zayden," he said. "That's legacy." But just as the warmth began to settle, Langston opened one envelope and frowned. "What is it?" Simone asked. He handed her the letter. It was from a private legal firm in D.C., signed by a partner with connections to one of the math trial's major sponsors. The language was cold, clinical, and unmistakably clear. "Your client's accusations have caused significant reputational harm to our affiliate institutions. We strongly urge you to cease further public commentary, or we will pursue defamation charges." Simone flipped to the second page, and her hands froze. Attached was a copy of Zayden's original scholarship application, with handwritten notes in the margins. One read, "Check background. This level of intellect unlikely." The letter sat on the kitchen table like a live wire. The edges trembled beneath Simone's fingertips as she reread the words: reputational harm, defamation, cease further public commentary. Langston stood by the window, jaw tight, watching a van idling across the street. It wasn't marked, but he'd seen it there before. Every instinct told him the silence around them was about to break again. Only this time, it wouldn't come from social media. It would come from power. "This isn't just about the school anymore," he said quietly. "This is the system closing ranks." Simone folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. "Then we fight back." By morning, the headlines had shifted again. Math Trials Committee reconsiders Zayden Thompson's win amid allegations of rule violation. Investigation opened into competition integrity, following political pressure. They didn't call it what it was, retaliation, but everyone could see the truth. They were trying to erase him. Again, Langston slammed his fist on the counter when he saw the news. They're going to strip the title, he said. They're trying to bury this like they buried that doctoral student years ago. Simone looked at him, eyes glassy. Not if we don't let them. She picked up the phone and called an old contact from the hospital, a civil rights attorney who had once fought discrimination cases against the state education board. Within hours, a legal team assembled around the Thompsons. Attorneys, advocates, media consultants. For the first time, Zayden wasn't fighting alone. The official hearing was scheduled in Washington, D.C. Just days later. The nation would be watching. It wasn't just about a title anymore. It had become a referendum on race, merit, and truth itself. The morning of the hearing, the marble steps of the Capitol were crowded with cameras and protesters. One side held signs that read, "Let the boy keep his crown. Truth has no color." The other side countered with, "STEM, not sympathy. Meritocracy, not media." Langston and Simone walked beside Zayden, as reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs flashed like lightning. But Zayden kept his gaze straight ahead, his face unreadable. Inside the committee room, the energy was electric, attention so sharp it could cut through steel. The panel of officials sat in a half circle at the front, their microphones gleaming. Behind them, cameras streamed live to millions of viewers. Every major network had tuned in. The lead committee chair, a white-haired woman with a calm voice and careful words, began. "This hearing is not to question genius," she said. "It is to question process. Did Mr. Thompson's victory violate established rules of competition?" Langston's jaw tightened. He knew what that meant. They couldn't find fault with the math, so they'd find fault with the structure. The first witness called was Langston Reed. He took the stand in his worn brown suit, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "I've spent 30 years teaching mathematics," he said. "And I've spent 30 years watching brilliance punished because it comes from the wrong zip code, the wrong skin tone, the wrong expectation." He paused, eyes sweeping the room. "They say they're questioning his process, but what they're really questioning is his right to exist in a space that was never built for him." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Langston continued. "When Zayden solved that equation, he didn't just complete a problem. He shattered a hierarchy. And the people in charge didn't know how to handle that. So they called it irregular, suspicious, impossible." He looked directly at the panel. If he were a white child from Boston or Palo Alto, they'd be calling him a prodigy, not a fraud. Simone's eyes filled with tears. Zayden sat still, hands folded in his lap, absorbing every word. Langston finished quietly. He was never supposed to win, but he did, and that's what terrifies them. Next, Zayden was called. As he stood and walked to the microphone, the cameras zoomed in. The room fell silent. He climbed onto the chair, his small frame dwarfed by the marble podium. He didn't have a script. No lawyers fed him lines. He just looked out at the rows of adults who had tried so hard to define him. "When I started solving the equation," he began softly, "it wasn't about winning anything. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about understanding something that didn't make sense." He looked down briefly, then back up. "They told me it was unsolvable. They laughed. They said people like me don't do this kind of math. And for a long time I believed them." A hush swept the room. "But then I realized," Zayden continued, "the problem wasn't just the math. The problem was the world around it. The way people decide who gets to be called smart, and who gets to be called lucky, who gets to be encouraged, and who gets told to stay quiet." He took a breath. His voice didn't waver. "When I solved it, they said I cheated. But the only thing I did wrong was not being what they expected." The cameras zoomed closer. Across the country, living rooms fell silent. Teachers paused lessons to stream the hearing live. Zayden leaned slightly forward. "I'm not here asking for permission to be smart. I'm here asking you to stop pretending that brilliance only belongs to certain people. Because math doesn't have a race, but the world still does." Langston wiped his eyes. Simone gripped the edge of the table so hard, her knuckles whitened. For the first time, even the committee chair looked visibly shaken. After hours of testimony, expert analysis and media spin, the hearing drew to a close. The committee announced that the final vote, to either affirm or revoke Zayden's championship title, would take place live on national television. That evening, Simone held her son close in the hallway afterward. "No matter what they say," she whispered, "you've already won." Langston placed a hand on Zayden's shoulder. "They can't erase what's already written in truth. But as they exited the building, Langston's phone buzzed again. A new message from an anonymous sender. It was just one line. "Don't let him go on TV tonight. They're not voting, they're staging." Langston froze mid-step, eyes darkening as he looked toward the swarm of reporters outside. The message glowed on his screen like a warning from the future. This isn't justice, it's a setup. The vote came at 8:00 p.m. sharp. 3 committee members. Leave television. A country holding its breath. The moderator's voice was steady, rehearsed, but carried a tension the cameras couldn't mask. After careful review and testimony from legal experts, educators, and the public, the committee has reached a decision. Langston watched from the edge of his seat, Simone clutching Zayden's hand. Millions of viewers watched the screen, their homes filled with the electric quiet that only history can bring. "We hereby recognize Zayden Thompson as the legitimate 2025 National Math Trials champion." The words rang out, not like a celebration, but like a verdict. The room didn't erupt. It exhaled. Simone's tears were instant. Langston closed his eyes just once. Zayden didn't move. He simply nodded, as if to say, "I already knew." But victory didn't bring peace. Not in America. The backlash was immediate. On social media, comments split down ideological lines. Some celebrated, calling Zayden a national treasure. Others decried it as wokeness infecting academia. Think pieces flooded the internet, most titled with the word symbol, though Zayden had made it clear he didn't want to be one. Still, he was everywhere. His image appeared on the cover of Time. Under the headline, "The Equation That Changed Everything." A scholarship fund was launched in his name, backed by Black mathematicians and social equity organizations, aiming to support underrepresented youth in STEM. Within days, the Zayden Initiative raised over $4 million. Schools across the country, especially elite private institutions, began public curriculum audits. District boards held emergency meetings. News anchors debated how implicit bias shaped testing, grading, and advancement. At least 4 Ivy League universities released public statements acknowledging historic underrepresentation and the recognition of mathematical excellence. Zayden, however, remained silent. Back home in Atlanta, the atmosphere was quieter, but not calmer. The street outside the Thompsons' apartment was now under 24-hour surveillance. Simone had received 3 more anonymous letters, one handwritten in red ink, that read, "He won the trophy, but we still own the system." The school tried to welcome him back with a ceremony, but Zayden refused. "They're not clapping because they changed," he told his mother. "They're clapping because they lost." Instead, he rejoined his classes quietly, under a special academic plan designed by the district superintendent himself. But Zayden's presence now drew attention everywhere he went. News vans loitered near the gates. Parents whispered in parking lots. Students stared as if he were part of some math-themed reality show. He couldn't walk the halls without hearing it. "Genius, cheater, that kid." And while no one said it out loud, many still didn't believe it. To them, Zayden hadn't earned anything. He just disrupted it all. His teachers changed too. Some treated him like glass, overpraising, afraid to challenge him. Others went quiet around him, scared their words might end up on the internet. But none changed more than Mr. Drexler, Zayden's homeroom teacher. Drexler had always been polite, neutral, the kind who smiled just enough to stay likable. But neutrality had become dangerous in Zayden's world. One morning, Drexler pulled him aside after class. "Just wanted to say I'm proud of you," he said, eyes darting around. "You've really grown." Zayden nodded, but he could feel it. The fear behind the praise, the tension in Drexler's posture. It wasn't about growth. It was about guilt. Langston tried to reintroduce some normalcy. He brought new books, designed creative assignments, and even began assembling a team of Black educators to build a nationwide mentorship network. "We can't just protect him," he told Simone. "We have to multiply him." Zayden met weekly with other gifted Black students via encrypted Zoom rooms, helping them navigate advanced equations, admissions prep, and the minefield of being brilliant in a world that didn't want them to be. But pressure built like a storm behind the scenes. One day during a quiet lunch period, a girl passed Zayden in the hallway and said, "Heard your mom's buying off the judges now too." The lie had begun to spread, a whisper campaign, likely seeded by anonymous forums. People claimed Langston had leaked the judges' audio as blackmail, that Simone had pulled strings using race politics, that Zayden had a team feeding him answers. It didn't matter that none of it was true. It only mattered that it sounded believable to people who already wanted to believe it. Then it escalated. On a rainy Thursday morning, as students filed into homeroom, Mr. Drexler stopped abruptly in front of Zayden's locker. His face went pale. Written across the metal in thick black marker were the words, "You don't belong here. Stay in your lane." Below it was a drawing of a broken pencil, snapped in half. He didn't call security. He didn't notify the administration. He quietly erased the message before Zayden could arrive. But another student saw it and reported it to the vice principal. That afternoon, Drexler was called into the office. So was Simone. When Simone arrived, she was livid. "You erased the evidence?" she asked. Drexler stammered. "I didn't want to upset him. I thought it'd be better if he didn't see it." Simone shook her head slowly. "You don't get to erase pain just because it makes you uncomfortable. That locker wasn't the problem. It was the message that's been on his back since the day he got here." Langston arrived minutes later with printed screenshots of online threats and school discussion boards, still flooded with hate. "You can't erase racism with Windex," he told the principal. "If this school can't protect him, we will sue." The principal nodded nervously. "We'll investigate." Simone laughed bitterly. "You've been investigating since he was 10 steps ahead of your whole faculty." Later that night, Zayden sat alone in his room, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't cried. He hadn't screamed. But his notebook sat untouched for the third day in a row. Simone knocked once before entering. "They're scared of you," she said gently. "I know." She sat beside him on the bed. "But you can't let their fear become your silence." Zayden finally turned his head toward her. "I'm not silent," he said. "I'm just thinking bigger." She blinked. "Bigger than what?" He pointed to the stars outside the window. "Everyone's been asking me to solve their problems. But I think it's time I start solving mine." The next morning, as Simone walked him into school, another teacher handed her a letter, unsigned, typed in block font. Inside it read, "He'll never make it to college. Not if we can help it." The typed letter burned in Simone's hands like it had weight, as if each word carried something toxic. "He'll never make it to college. Not if we can help it." The page trembled between her fingers as she reread it, not out of disbelief, but of recognition. This was no longer subtle, no longer whispers in hallways, or comments online. This was a threat. Langston arrived at the school within an hour. His expression was tight, deliberate, the kind that only appeared when rage was buried beneath strategy. "You kept it?" he asked. Simone nodded, sliding the letter into an evidence sleeve. "I'm done pretending these people can be reasoned with." Principal Harding, the newly appointed replacement for Meredith Ward, sat across from them in his office. His tone was rehearsed, corporate. "We take all threats seriously," he said, adjusting his tie. "We've already contacted district security." Langston leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You contacted the district? You have a 10-year-old genius who's been targeted for months, and your solution is filing paperwork." The principal bristled. "We're increasing security on campus. Cameras, ID checkpoints, routine patrols." Simone's voice broke through the tension like glass. "Security doesn't protect against intent." Her words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. By the end of the week, Astoria Prep resembled a fortress. Metal detectors were installed at every entrance. A security guard followed Zayden from class to class, pretending not to stare. Parents protested the inconvenience, complaining that one student's drama shouldn't disrupt the entire school day. In the parking lot, a father muttered loudly, "If he brings that kind of attention, maybe he doesn't belong here anymore." Zayden heard it. He didn't respond. But the silence was changing him. His once curious gaze had hardened. He no longer lingered in classrooms after the bell, or volunteered for after-school sessions. Even Langston noticed. During one of their evening study sessions, he closed Zayden's notebook, mid-equation. "You're pulling away." "I'm just tired," Zayden replied. Langston looked at him closely. "You're not tired. You're losing faith. Not in math, but in people." Zayden's pencil hovered above the table. "Maybe I should. Math never lied to me. People did." Langston wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because somewhere deep down he feared the boy was right. The calls started 2 days later. At first Langston thought they were spam blocked. Numbers, static on the line. But then came the voice. A low, distorted whisper. "Stop mentoring him. He's not your legacy. He's your liability." He hung up immediately. The next night, it happened again. Same voice. Same tone. "You can't protect him forever. They'll build another one. Whiter. easier to control. Langston recorded it this time, though the distortion made identification impossible. He forwarded the audio to Simone, along with a simple message. They're not bluffing. She called him instantly. What do they mean, build another one? Langston exhaled. It means they're already setting the stage. You can't erase a story like Zayden's without replacing it. He was right. Within a week, headlines appeared, introducing Eli Forrester, a 12-year-old prodigy from Connecticut, whose family ran one of the country's largest education tech companies. His father, billionaire Grant Forrester, had just announced a new mathematics merit foundation, complete with a scholarship named for innovation over identity. News outlets branded Eli as the next great mathematical mind. One morning show even called him the real face of American genius. Zayden watched from their living room couch, expression unreadable, as Eli solved a sequence on live television, while anchors clapped in awe. Simone muted the screen. They're baiting you, she said softly. I know, Zayden replied. They're rewriting the story. Langston stood behind them, arms folded. And they're doing it faster than anyone expected. The reporter's tone wasn't even subtle. They framed Eli's rise as a return to discipline and tradition after months of controversy. One headline read, Forrester boy proves genius still comes the old-fashioned way.
Simone slammed her laptop shut. Old-fashioned?
She repeated bitterly.
They mean white.
Langston's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous text. This time it wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. Watch the National STEM Showcase. The boy will be there. So will your student. The email arrived minutes later in Simone's inbox. Official, glossy, and too convenient. Invitation National STEM Showcase. Live broadcast event. Featuring Eli Forrester, National Math Trials champion Zayden Thompson, and others. Langston read it twice. This isn't an invite, he said. It's a setup. Simone frowned. What kind of showcase pits kids against each other on live TV? The kind that wants to control the narrative. Langston said grimly. Zayden sat quietly, staring at the screen. Let them. Both adults turned toward him.
I'm not running anymore, he said. If they want to compare me, I'll show them the difference.
Simone shook her head. You don't have to prove anything. Zayden met her gaze. You told me once I couldn't let their fear become my silence. That silenced her. Langston hesitated, then nodded slowly. Then we do this on our terms. Preparations began. Langston coached Zayden through mock sessions, teaching him not just equations but endurance. Simone handled the media requests carefully, declining interviews that twisted their words and accepting only one, a long-form piece with The Atlantic titled, The Boy Who Solved and Survived. Zayden studied, but his focus was different now. Calmer, colder. He wasn't chasing approval. He was reclaiming authorship. But the closer the event drew, the darker the pressure grew. Simone received a call from an unfamiliar number. This one from a woman claiming to represent the Astoria School Board's legal recovery team. We understand your family's under significant stress, the woman said smoothly. We'd like to offer a private settlement. You agree to withdraw all claims and media involvement in exchange for a substantial financial package. Simone's grip tightened on the phone. You're trying to buy my son's silence? Not silence, the woman replied. Closure. Simone hung up mid-sentence. She didn't tell Zayden about the offer, but Langston found out through a forwarded voicemail. He didn't tell her that the same woman had called him too. The night before the showcase, Zayden couldn't sleep. He sat on the balcony, knees pulled up, watching Atlanta's skyline flicker in the distance. Langston joined him quietly. You ready? Zayden nodded. They're not testing me tomorrow, he said. They're testing what people are willing to believe. Langston smiled faintly. Then make them believe in something they can't take away. Simone stepped out behind them, wrapping a blanket around her son's shoulders. Whatever happens tomorrow, she whispered, you've already rewritten the story once. They just don't know how to read it yet. The next day, the nation tuned in. A sleek stage, bright lights, 2 podiums, one labeled Eli Forrester, the other Zayden Thompson. The event was billed as a celebration of young minds, but to everyone watching, it was a duel intellect versus intellect, race versus reputation. In the audience, Simone sat rigid, heart pounding. Langston gripped his notebook like a talisman. Eli walked on stage first, waving confidently, his father smiling proudly from the front row. The crowd roared. Then Zayden stepped out. The applause was quieter, hesitant, respect mixed with resentment. The host stepped forward, his smile wide, voice dripping with performative neutrality. Tonight, he said, two of America's brightest young minds face off in a 1-hour live challenge. No teams, no help, just pure math. The crowd cheered again. Cameras zoomed in. Langston's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from an unknown number appeared on the screen. If he solves what we give him tonight, we'll make sure he never competes again. As the first problem flashed onto the giant screen, Zayden froze. Not because it was difficult, but because it was his equation, the one they'd said he stole. The one that started everything. And now, it was being credited to Eli Forrester. The stage was bathed in white light. Everything about it gleamed. The polished podiums, the crystal-clear screens, the rows of high-profile judges seated in silence behind dark glass. The entire showcase felt more like an award show than an academic event. But beneath the spectacle, a far more sinister design had been scripted. Two boys stood on opposite sides of the platform. One, Eli Forrester, all clean lines and confidence, his navy suit hand-tailored, his smile practiced, a walking symbol of elite assurance. The other, Zayden Thompson, slightly shorter, his blazer borrowed, his shoes too scuffed for television, and yet his presence impossible to ignore. Across America, millions of families watched from their homes. Classrooms had paused lessons to stream the broadcast. College deans watched from offices. Political commentators had already framed the match as a test of whether America still rewards excellence, or just identity. Zayden understood what they were doing. This wasn't about math, it was about legitimacy. And he knew, if he didn't win this, they would write him out of his own story. The host smiled for the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's challenge will be broken into 3 timed equations. Our contestants will solve each live, with results verified instantly by our on-site board of experts. And now, the first equation. A massive screen lit up. Zayden's heart dropped. There it was. His equation. The one they said he didn't solve. The one Dr. Halbrook had laughed at. The same problem Langston had helped him crack in secret. But now it was being credited on-screen to the Forrester Foundation Research Archive. Zayden stood frozen for just a moment. The room blurred around him. The applause, the announcer, even Eli, who looked unfazed, his eyes already locked on the screen. Langston saw it happen. He rose slightly from his seat, whispering under his breath, "They're trying to humiliate him." Simone reached out, gripping his wrist. Zayden turned toward the screen again. The equation hadn't changed. Something inside him had. The timer began. 60 minutes. The race was live. Eli dove into the equation, with mechanical precision. His stylus moved like choreography, trained and rehearsed. Each step was confident, if not inspired. Zayden stared at the equation, not with confusion, with understanding. The question wasn't how to solve it. He'd already done that years ago in silence. The real question now was what it meant to solve it here. Under these lights in front of a world that had already decided who deserved genius and who didn't. For 5 minutes he didn't write a single line. Commentators whispered. One host leaned toward the mic. Looks like young Thompson is already falling behind. Stage fright perhaps. Another chimed in. More measured. Or maybe he's just choosing to be deliberate. Langston leaned forward. Come on, Zayden. Make them wait. Make them watch. Then finally, Zayden moved. He started not at the top of the problem, but at the center, rewriting the structure itself. He wasn't solving their question. He was reframing it. Not just responding to their logic, but exposing its limitations. His solution unfolded like music, building layers, revealing hidden harmonies. Each step wasn't just correct. It was elegant, transformative. Even the judges began to lean in. Eli noticed. He looked up from his own work, and for the first time, his brow creased. Zayden wasn't catching up. He was overtaking. As the timer hit 20 minutes, a quiet buzz filled the room. Eli was progressing, but his steps were rigid. A memorized path. Zayden's were intuitive, creative, not just accurate, alive. By the time the second equation appeared, the energy had shifted. This one involved predictive modeling, a complex layering of future value algorithms. Zayden glanced at it once, and smiled. Not because it was easy, but because it was familiar. It was based on an equation he'd published weeks earlier in a small online academic forum, one that had mysteriously been scrubbed of his name days before the showcase. He didn't react. He simply picked up his stylus and began again, rewriting the problem from memory, restructuring it in front of a nation. "Who is this kid?" one judge whispered off mic. "He's rewriting the damn logic." At home, in living rooms across America, people began to notice. On Twitter, the hashtags changed. Zayden was first. Math stolen. Truth in numbers. Then came the final equation. Time left 15 minutes. The room dimmed. The screen flashed a single line of variables that at first seemed ordinary, until Zayden realized something chilling. It wasn't just a test. It was a trap. The equation had been deliberately written to fail, designed with a recursive paradox that would make any complete answer collapse on itself. Zayden paused. He looked at Eli, who was still solving, unaware that the equation was flawed. Then he looked at the crowd, the judges, the cameras, the audience waiting to see him fall. He could play the game, pretend, show he understood. Or he could do what they didn't expect. Zayden raised his hand. "I'm requesting permission to revise the final equation before I begin." Gasps echoed. The announcer turned to the board. "That's unorthodox." A pause. Then a judge leaned forward. "Explain your reasoning." Zayden's voice was calm. "The problem is self-invalidating. It's not meant to be solved. It's meant to discredit. I can solve around it, but only if I show what's wrong with it first." A hush fell. The judges looked at each other. Then, "Permission granted." Eli froze. Zayden began again. This time, not solving, but dissecting. He highlighted the paradox, annotated the collapse point, and reconstructed a modified equation that maintained integrity. And then he solved that. 10 seconds left. Zayden's final line appeared on the screen. The buzzer rang. The announcer stepped forward. "The board is now reviewing both submissions. Please hold." The room tensed. America leaned in. Minutes passed.
Then came the verdict.
"After thorough review, we confirm Zayden Thompson's solution is correct, original and mathematically transformative." The crowd exploded. This time, the standing ovation didn't hesitate. Even judges stood. Cameras zoomed in on Eli, who remained seated, expression unreadable. Langston and Simone rose in unison, tears streaming, hands over mouths. The noise blurred into something unreal, something earned. Zayden stood still. He looked at the board. His solution glowed. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just looked directly into the camera and nodded. The screen zoomed into the whiteboard, revealing the final line of Zayden's solution. But this time he had signed it, not just his name. Zayden Thompson. Truth doesn't need permission. And then the screen cut to black. They tried to erase his brilliance, bury his truth, and rewrite the story in someone else's name. But Zayden proved that silence isn't survival. It's resistance that leaves a legacy. If his fight moved you, type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.